Her dollop of deceit came in a jar of white lies. Welcome to Wolfe Mysteries. I'm your host. This mystery circle keeps growing. Comment below with your location. Your presence lights up the case. The mayonnaise arrived at the brownstone at 11:03 on a Wednesday morning, and by 11:17, it was the shadiest condiment I'd ever seen. It didn't sneak in through the usual channels. Fritz didn't order it. I didn't haul it in. And if you think Nero Wolfe would stoop to grocery shopping, you've got him pegged for someone who moves. This squat jar, with its obnoxiously chipper label, showed up in a brown paper bag, carried by a woman whose posture screamed. She was either about to spill a secret or a shiv. "Natalie Vetterline," she announced, voice like bourbon over cracked glass, stepping into the hall without an invite, a move only 6 people I know have pulled and lived. "Miss Vetterline," I said, edging between her and the office door. "Mr. Wolfe's deep in his holiest ritual, dodging folks who bring unannounced groceries." "It's not a grocery," she cut in. "It's a warning." Well, that hooked me. Even in my line of work, a mayonnaise jar doubling as a threat isn't an everyday delivery. Took the bag from her and peered inside standard glass container white cap vintage branding that looked like it was trying too hard to be ironic. The label read it's creamy real mayonnaise since 1913, nothing ticking, nothing leaking, no suspicious powders or wires, just a condiment that had apparently offended her enough to bring it here like an exhibit in court. I gestured toward. The red said, "Have a seat, I'll see what kind-of mood the man is in." Wolfe was in the plant rooms. It meant 20 more minutes of silent orchid worship, which to him was sacrosanct, and to me was just a lot of humid waiting. I sat across from Natalie and watched her tap one finger against her knee like a metronome for nerves. Her clothes were business casual with an edge expensive, but meant to look effortless. The kind of woman who'd been a secretary once and made a promise she never intended to keep. "Why mayonnaise?" I asked her finally. "It's not the mayonnaise," she said. "It's who sent it and what it used to belong to." 10 minutes later, Wolfe emerged exuding the pleasant odor of moss peat and disinterest. "Archie," he said, pausing at the threshold. "To the office. Who's in the front room and why?" I stood. "Natalie Vetterline. She brought us a jar of mayonnaise and a warning." Wolfe's brows drew together. "Fritz is not to be interrupted during lunch preparations. If instructed, she says the mayonnaise used to belong to someone else, someone important, and that someone might be dead or lying, or both." Wolfe grunted, which in his dialect meant a reluctant "Go on, Natalie," rose smoothly like a stage actress who knew her cue had arrived. She picked up the jar and held it as if it might whisper something incriminating. "It's from my uncle," she said. "Jerome Vetterline. He disappeared 2 days ago. I found this in his fridge, except it wasn't the brand he used. He hated Benedict's. Always said it was an insult to eggs, so I checked the label. Expiration date was tampered with, and the contents inside not mayonnaise." Wolfe tilted his head. "And what was inside, Miss Vetterline?" Her eyes locked on his thumb drive, encrypted, and a note. She pulled the folded scrap of paper from her purse and handed it to me. I read it aloud. "If anything happens to me, tell Nero Wolfe. He's the only one who will understand why this matters." There was a beat of silence. Wolfe tapped a finger on the armrest. Fritz from the kitchen cleared his throat with the precision of a man whose lunch service had just been spiritually derailed. Finally, Wolfe spoke. "Miss Vetterline, I dislike mayonnaise. I abhor mysteries that present themselves in riddles, and I am not in the business of pursuing ghosts." However, he opened his eyes fully for the first time, the way alien might flick its gaze toward an envelope that just limped. "I am not indifferent to a challenge that presents me attention. Archie, bring the jar, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is how the case of the mayonnaise that lied began with a woman, a thumb drive, and a condiment that didn't match its story. If you've ever seen a man react to an uninvited guest the way Wolfe reacts to a crooked mayonnaise jar, I suggest you invest in new friends. By noon, the brownstone was officially contaminated. Fritz was furious. He didn't say anything but sniffed at the offending jar as if it had insulted his lineage. Wolfe, after at your order to bring the thing into the office, had it placed on the desk. With all the ceremony of a hand grenade missing its pin. Do not open it, he instructed me, lifting a brow, as if he might lunge at it out of curiosity. As tempting as it is to spread industrial espionage on toast, I'll restrain myself. Natalie Vetteline sat again in the red chair opposite. Wolfe, her legs crossed neatly, her composure mostly intact. I had the distinct feeling she wasn't telling us everything, but Wolfe didn't push her, not yet. He'd learn it dearly on that silence could squeeze a confession better than pressure. He gestured lazily toward the thumb drive. Where is it now? Hidden somewhere safe? That won't do, Wolfe said, settling deeper into his chair. You brought the bait, now you must supply the hook. She hesitated. I wasn't sure I could trust you, you stillorant. I said that's clear enough. Wolfe closed his eyes and exhaled. Miss Vetterline, either you want my help, or you do not. But if you continue to withhold information, I'll ask Mr. Goodwin to escort you out with your condiment. That did it. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small flat black case. Inside was the thumb drive, sleek, unmarked, and probably worth more than my last suit. I didn't know what was on it, she said. I tried to open the files, but they're locked. All I could see was a folder titled Choleric. It asked for a password. Choleric. Wolfe echoed, his eyes open, interest peaked in that maddeningly calm way of his. Curious. He nodded toward me. Have it examined. Take it to Mr. Breener. No mention of its origin. Just tell him I wish to know the structure and file types. No decryption yet. I took the case. Got it. Anything else? Yes. Find out about Jerome. Vetterline discreetly confirm whether he is missing or dead. Miss Vetterline stiffened. He's not dead, your certainty. Wolfe murmured his admirable butyral of evidence. Miss Vetterline, not sentiment. I pocketed the drive and headed out, but not before. Fritz shot me a look like I'd just taken a soiled shoe into his kitchen. The brownstone wasn't just disturbed, it was on the edge of infection. The last time Wolfe let digital hardware cross the threshold, the FB, I got involved, and we had to burn a rug. I won too. I was in Midtown with Lon Cohen at the Gazette, wheedling for information over a pastrama sandwich. He didn't want to share. Jerome Vetterline, he said, chewing. Sounds familiar. Corporate guy. Used to be with Allure Foods, right? That's what I worshiping. You tell me. Lon flipped through his mental Rolodex. Left the company 5 years. Per gallant quiet. Rumor was he had something on one of their R&D execs and took a golden parachute to keep it zipped. After that, nothing, and now he's missing. Lon nodded. Might be nothing, or might be someone remembered what he had back at the brownstone. Wolfe had summoned Saul Panzeriu, called me in for a sandwich. Saul asked, eyeing the egg salad Fritz had provided with more suspicion than appetite. No. Wolfe replied, you're here because I expect resistance. From whom? Saul asked. That Wolfe said remains to be seen. Natalie had gone silent. Not evasive, just inward, as though she'd placed her trust in Wolfe and now regretted the down payment. She gave us one last piece before leaving. My uncle used to say, if you want talk, know who's lying. Don't look at what they said, look at what they changed. With that, she left the brownstone, and Wolfe finally leaned back, hands steepled. This, he said quietly, is not about Addis' appearance. I raised an eyebrow. Then what? He glanced at the mayonnaise jar, still sitting on his desk like a board accessory. It's about misdirection. Something is being hidden in plain sight. He turned his eyes to me. Find out what Allure Foods has been hiding since Jerome left. That is the lever. And that was the moment I knew Hadiver. This was it was going to make the orchids. Wiltshire wouldn't think a food company could produce a rogues gallery, but let me tell you, once you stir enough ambition into a vat of processed condiments, the stink rises fast by the time. I circled back to brownstone at dusk. I had the early outlines of a cast that would have made a boardroom blush. Wolfe had remained in the office immobile as ever when I walked in. He glanced at me once and returned to a page of the orchids of Madagascar, as if it were more useful than anything I'd uncovered. But when he laid down my notepad and said, "I've got 4 faces and 5 motives," he looked up ever so slightly. Report. I obliged. Jerome Vetteline was head of new product strategy for Allure Foods until 2019. I began left abruptly with a retirement pact that included a non-disclosure the size of Connecticut. Since then he's been consulting part-time and living off hush money, publicly quiet, privately not so much. Wolfe grunted, which in Wolfe-ese translates loosely to elaborate. But don't it bore me? I started the lineup. First up, Cynthia Borden, now Executive VP Off-Brand Development at Allure, used to be Jerome's protégé until she leapfrogged him and allegedly iced him out of a major project called Project Caloric, same name as that thumb drive folder word is. Vetteline claimed the project was a nutritional fraud, but the competitor pushed it forward anyway. Borden went public with it in 2020 as Allure's crown jewel, a proprietary additive that cuts calorie counts without altering flavor. Wolfe's mouth tightened. That meant interest. She's slick. I added Stanford MBA fitness guru media darling, also last person seen publicly with Vetteline 12 weeks ago at an industry gala. They were not smiling. HM second Benton Hefner, director of regulatory affairs, career bureaucrat turned corporate watchdog. Hugh is the one tasked with managing internal compliance around caloric, and supposedly the one who signed off on pushing it through. Word is Vetteline, and he went head-to-head over some numbers that didn't add up. Vetteline accused him of burying a negative study. Third Wolfe asked. I flipped the page. Desmond Piley, ex-journalist turned PR hound. He handled Allure's crisis communications during the launch of caloric. Rumor is he was paid handsomely to make a couple often flattering reports. Disappear. Federline once called him a man who could gilderize a scandal with a scented press release. And the fourth Julian, Nest-led food scientist academic type who got seduced by corporate money, wrote fair white papers backing caloric safety, quiet, twitchy, and rumored to be half a breakdown away from writing a tell-all. Wolfe closed his book, a clear sign I had his attention. Any one of them could have motive. I said. Borden to preserve her brand. Hafner to keep his hands clean. Pyle to avoid being caught mid-spin. Nesto avoid implosion. Take your pick, do so. Wolfe said calmly. Pick one. I sighed. Borden's the alpha, the rest orbit her. He nodded. And what of Jerome Vetteline? Still off the radar. His car is parked at his townhouse. His doorman hasn't seen him in days. His phone's off, no charges on his credit card. But the place hasn't been tossed. Looks like he packed a bag and a sapper. Voluntarily, Wolfe turned toward the windows. Thinking after a moment, he said, "Summon them." I blinked. You want all 4 in the brownstone at once? No, not yet. One at a time. Begin with Cynthia Borden. Bait the hook with the mayonnaise? I asked. No. He said, with the implication that the mayonnaise has a witness. The next morning, Cynthia Borden arrived with the casual confidence of Simeon, who didn't get rattled by subpoenas, much less private detective-ish. Wore a cream suit that looked like it had been pressed by angels, and a pair of heels that could crack walnuts. I brought her into the office, and Wolfe gave her a long, measured look. He didn't offer his hand. He never does, and she didn't expect it, which put her ahead of most people who sit in that chair. I'm told, she began, that you contacted me on behalf of Jerome Vetteline, not on his behalf. Wolfe said. On the basis of his disappearance? I see. She crossed her legs as that disappears dramatic tendencies. Indeed, Wolfe murmured tell. Me, Miss Borden, when was the last time you saw him 2 weeks ago at the Hudson Food Innovation Awards? He was graciously bitter. You argued she gave a practicedmo. He wanted to be right. I wanted to be successful. We both achieve our goals, was he? Threatening exposure to what she said coolly. Wolfe paused to the falsification of caloric's nutritional claims. Now that got her attention. Her eyebrows flicked up, not in surprise, but recognition. I see. She looked from Wolfe to me. So that's what this is about. This, Wolfe said, is about a jar of mayonnaise that should not exist. I brought the jar from the safe where I tucked it overnight. She looked at it like she might laugh until I popped the top and tilted it just enough to show her the false bottom. Where did you get that? She asked. From your former colleague's refrigerator. I said. Right before Hedesappered that shut her up for a moment, she recovered quickly. Then you already know what's at stake. Not yet, Wolfe said, but we soon shall. That will be all. Miss Borden, am I a suspect? No, you are an answer in search of a question. An hour later, Desmond Pyle looked like a man who kept his alibis in his wallet and updated them weekly. He had a voice like melted butter and hands that wouldn't stop adjusting his cuffs. Jerem was unstable, he said, brilliant but erratic. He latched on to conspiracies the cold, onto a toddler you dismissed. His concerns, Wolfe asked. I spun them. That was my job. Did you suppress a report? Pyle hesitated. I made certain unverified informing didn't become verified. Panic by altering data. I'm not a scientist, Nero Wolfe. I'm a narrative specialist, Wolfe grunted. And your current narrative that Jerome vanished because he couldn't let go. He was fixated, obsessed. I wouldn't be surprised if he staged this himself. Would you be surprised if hadn't? Pyle paused. Less than I'd like. Later that afternoon, Julian Nest. Julian Nest was what happens when a PhD gets a conscience. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week, and his voice cracked on the word caloric. I was told it was Safei, said we did our tests, but there were anomalies, suppressed metabolic response in rodents. You signed off. I said I was pressured. By whom? He said nothing. Booth's eyes flicked toward Cynthia Borden's name. When I laid it among my notes, she told you to fake it. She told me nothing. She made it clear what results were expected. Did Vetterline? No. Yes. He tried to make me go public. Why didn't you? He looked at the floor. Because I wanted to keep my job, and because Desmond told me. Jerome was bluffing. The final visit. Benton Hafner came in last. Gray suit, gray hair, gray ethics. He was calm, polite, and unreadable. Fedeline had theories. They weren't actionable. You read reports. We evaluated relevance. Same thing. He smiled. In business. Yes. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. If Vetterline dies, Mr. Hafner, so does your insulation. Hafner's eyes narrowed. That sounds like a threat. No. Wolfe said a forecast. By evening, Wolfe had returned to stillness, watching the shadows stretch across the park. All four are lying. I said no. Wolfe replied 3 are lying. Onez, calculating which one that he said. We shall soon know. If there's one thing you learn chasing crooks and covering Wolfe's back, it's this: people are easier to read when they're in motion. You can catch a lie in their eyes, but you confirm it in their footprints. Wolfe, of course, prefers not to move at all. He believes in conclusions arriving on his doorstep like hot sow. My job is to make sure the sow doesn't get dropped en route. By mid-morning the next day, I had a to-do list that would have choked a lesser man. Wolfe wanted deeper dives on all 4 suspects, but especially Cynthia Borden and Julian Nest. One because she radiated control like a tungsten filament. The other because he looked ready to crack like an old egg. I started with Nest. The man lived in a condo in Tribeca. That probably cost more than my annual salary and looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the Obama administration. Books everywhere, paper spiraled like hoarder origami, and a whiteboard covered in formulas, some of which I'm pretty sure we're either chemical reactions or abstract art or Goodwin, he said, blinking rapidly. As he opened the door, I wasn't expecting no one ever. As I said, mind if I come in, he hesitated, then waved me in with the kind-off reluctant courtesy you show to an exterminator. You suspect might judge you. I took a stroll around his apartment while he fiddled with coffee. He wouldn't drink, still working for Allure. I asked it casually. No, he said. Technically, I'm consulting off books. Caloric? His Sean twitched. It's not as bad as he thought Jerome was. He saw conspiracies in nutritional data. He believed we were lying, were you? He paused. We had presented the best version of the truth. I nodded at the whiteboard. That new truth. He followed my gaze, then quickly peeled the curtain across it. That's personal. I didn't press. I had what I needed. Nest was rattled, terrified. He backed the wrong horse and barely holding himself together. If someone had threatened him or bribed him, he wouldn't hold out long. Next stop, Cynthia. Board in her office at Allure's Manhattan headquarters sat behind a glass wall, the size of a movie screen, with a skyline view and a receptionist who could stop traffic with a glance. I gave her my name and got the expected hesitation, followed by a reluctant, Morton, we'll see you for 10 minutes. Borden was on the phone when I entered, her voice low, controlled, surgical. Then have legal push back on Section 3C. We're not revising the nutrition panel just because the FDA hiccuped. She ended the call and looked up. Mr. Goodwin, I'm busy, so let's avoid the preamble. Sure, I said. Did you threaten Nest? A flicker, just a micro expression, gone in an instant. I encouraged clarity. She said, not everybody appreciates pressure as a growth tool. Did you pay Desmond Pyle to suppress a lab report? She raised a brow. I paid Desmond to control stories, not write them. What's this really about, Jerome? Vetaline may be dead. He left a message behind, said you were the reason. And a third flicker. This time slower, her gaze hardened and her voice lowered. He said a lot of things. He wanted to blow up the project because it stopped being his. Heckled instead. Being irrelevant. Is that what this is? A loyalty play from beyond the grave? I stood. It's a fact-checking mission you may want to consider. Your answers before we convene again. Back at the brownstone, I filled Wolfe in while Hesse bored a plate of Fritz's duck with juniper glaze. His appetite, I'd noticed, had increased in proportion to the emotional decline of our suspects. S. Borden has no fear. I said incorrect. Wolfe replied, she has no visible fear that is more dangerous. I handed over a typed summary of my next visits, one to a mid-level analyst named Mark Willoughby, who had worked under Hafner, and another to a woman named Tilda Fry. Vetterline's old assistant. Willoughby turned out to be bland enough to be invisible. Nice tea, memorized answers. But his voice cracked when I asked about the missing report from the caloric trial. He insisted it was a clerical oversight, which translated from corporate PR means it was torched, and we're not supposed to talk about it. Tilda Fry was different. She met me in a diner in Queens, nerve houses, a thorn in a gun shop. She brought a manila folder with her unlabeled no digital trail. Jerome asked me to hide this. She said if anything happened, Somi needed to see it. Inside the folder were printed screenshots. Internal memos, nutritional data drafts, emails from Nest to Borden, raising red flags in line from Nest stuck out like blood on linen. We can't justify the published calorie values with current absorption metrics. This is either a miscalculation or a deliberate manipulation. Wolfe spent an entire 15 minutes reading the folder before speaking. This is motive, he said simply, and pretext. But it is not a murder weapon. If there was a murder, I said, indeed, that is the question. Then the trespass happened at 6:22 p.m. Fritz knocked, unusual in itself, and said, "We're Goodwin, something's not right in the pantry." Now Fritz's kitchen is as sacred as Wolfe's orchids or the globe stand in his office. He inventories his shelves like a surgeon, accounts for scalpels if something was wrong in there. It wasn't a casual slip. We followed him down the R's. He said, pointing the spice rack, "Someone's moved them." I looked, sure enough. Bay leaves were where the oregano should have been. Paprika had rotated 90. Wolfe would never have noticed, but Fritz knew the mayonnaise jar. Wolfe murmured, "Check the safe." I ran to the office. The safe was locked, no tamperings inside. The jar remained undisturbed, but the false bottom gone. Someone had entered the brownstone, found the pantry as a proxy route or staging ground, and tried to confirm something about the jar. I returned and said, "Nothing stolen, but false bottom is gone, just the jar remains." Wolfe's mouth compressed into a tight line. They no longer need the shell. They've confirmed what was inside. He turned to Fritz. "No one enters this house without your knowledge. Again, even you. Archie will knock." Fritz gave a crisp nod. I stepped closer. "This means they're getting desperate." "No," Wolfe said, rising slightly in his chair. "A rare motion. It means they're almost ready, and so must we be that night." Wolfe made 3 calls, one to Saul Panza, Oneto Fred Durkin, one to Lon Cohen. Each was given a single name. Each was told to listen and not interfere. We bait the trap tomorrow. Wolfe said as I turned off the lights, "And the prey, they will come." Wolfe said, because like all liars they need to know, but we know the brownstone is not Fort Knox. It doesn't have retina scans, laser grids, or a moat with alligators. What it has is something better: Fritz Brainer's memory, Nero Wolfe's paranoia, and me. So when someone rearranged our spices to get a bead on a jar that was no longer worth stealing, it wasn't a breach, it was a message, and messages mean someone's getting nervous. It's when they start making mistakes. Or if they're smarter than average, they try to make you think. They have. We were on edge, all 3 of us. Wolfe was quieter than usual, which for him is saying something. Fritz cleaned the pantry 3 times in 2 days, and I kept one hand closer to my holster. Then, I'd like to admit whoever came inside the brownstone hadn't taken anything, but they tried to find the truth. And in our line of work, truth gets people killed more often than lies do. Wolfe didn't sleep that night. Not that I saw. He sat in the office until sunrise, thinking he did dictate. Any letters didn't touch his books. He just stared at the jar as though it might confess by 9 o'clock a.m. And the next morning he was back in his chair, his voice low but precise. "Archie, you will call Miss Borden. Tell her you've reviewed the drive. Tell her the data is incriminating, that we've decrypted parts of it, that I intend to go public unless she tells me who tampered with the reports. She hang up. She won't." He said, "Because she needs to know what we know." I made the call. She didn't hang up. Instead, Cynthia Borden suggested we meet. The meeting, she invited me to an overpriced Ave in Soho, where the espresso was served in thimbles, and the pastries had names longer than their ingredients. She was already there when I arrived, tapping her phone with one hand and swirling a spoon with the other. "I sat for you. Said you'd reviewed the data," she said. Without looking up, I did, and I think Ness didn't falsify the data on his own. I think someone gave him a reason. She finally looked up, one sculpted eyebrow raised. "And you think that someone was May?" Said nothing, just waited. Cynthia smiled, tight, controlled. Jerome was obsessed. He thought he was the hero in a corporate thriller. But there were no villains, just numbers, just risk assessments and marketing. People trusted those numbers. People trust a lot of things, she said, that doesn't make them accurate. I slid an envelope across the table. These were taken from Betterline's private files. One email from Nest 2 from Hafner, one internal memo with your name on it. She didn't open the envelope, just stared at it. "Is this the part," she asked, "where I make a deal?" "No," I said, "this is the part where I see if you flinch." She didn't, which was its own kind of answer. Meanwhile, Saul Panzer had been busy. Wolfe had sent Saul to watch Nest's building in Tribeca, not to follow Nest. just to watch who watched him at. 4:15 p. Saul saw someone enter the building through the freight entrance. Didn't go up to. Nest's floor, just hovered, took a call. Left without signing in. He got a photo. Desmond. Pile corporate spin doctor and professional vanisher. I brought it to Wolfe, so. Pile's sniffing around Nest. No, I said no. Wolfe murmured. He's confirming whether Nest is still a liability. Think he was the pantry phantom. No too much risk. It required finest discretion. That was. Hafner, why him? Because the pantry was stouched. But the office was not. The jar was opened. But not stolen. That's not spin. That's control. Legal control. The pantry is a kitchen, a legal gray zoneth. Office is a trap. He was right. The pantry wasn't just about getting the jar, it was about confirming. It existed and that we had it. A chess move, not a burglary. That's when Wolfe stood slowly, heavily. Bring them. He said, all of them together. The time for individual performances is over. But before we could send the invites, something else moved. It was just after dinner. Lamb chops with rosemary glaze and a sour Fritz had been dying to test when I went to the office to retrieve the files for Thecoming confrontation. The key knife was there. It wasn't our knife. It was a small folding blade, silver, handled clean, tucked behind a stack of ledgers. No blood, no fingerprints. Just placement. It hadn't been there earlier. Wolfe hadn't seen it. And Fritz didn't. He used knives that folded. I called Wolfe in. He didn't touch, just looked at it for a long moment. Subtle hesed. What does it mean? It means the trespasser returned, looking for the thumb drive. No, looking to warn us or frame someone. I stared at the knife. Y'all think this is staged? Yes, he said. And not for us then. For who? He looked at that knife. Again, for the person they believe is going to betray them, whoever left. This is telling someone else I know. What you're about to do. The Wolfe called the meeting for the next evening. All 4 suspects. No excuses, no substitutions. Fred Durkenwold. Be watching the alley. Saul would watch the front. I'd watch the eyes. But that afternoon, I made one last stop back to Jerome Vitaline's stoutness. Something had nagged at me. Natalie said he hated Benedict's mayonnaise. That meant he noticed brands obsessed over details. I had a key she'd given me, and Wolfe had cleared the errand. I scanned the fridge. Again, nothing but a pantry. That's where it clicked. The shelf held 3 jars of mustard, but they weren't aligned. 2 was spicy gold, 1 was golden spice. I twisted the golden spice bottom, twisted free, and a third thumb drive. I'd brought it straight to Wolfe. We plugged it in with a scrubber. This one wasn't encrypted. It held video. Vitaline alone in his home office, speaking directly to the camera. If you're watching this, he said then, either I finally made a difference, or someone made me disappear. I never thought it would come to this, but caloric isn't just bad science, it's a cover. The numbers were skewed. The metabolic listing was faked, not just for market value, but because someone shorted the stock before the reports were filed. They made millions before the product even launched. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. This wasn't about nutrition, he said. It weighs about fraud. And just like that, the chessboard tilted. This wasn't a case about health or ethics. It was about money, which meant our list of suspects wasn't just dangers. They were cornered, and cornered people tend to bite. There are 2 ways pressure builds in a case like this one. Is gradual, a slow turn-off screw, while people pretend not to sweat. The other is like cracking a champagne cork with a hammer. By the time Wolfe finished watching Jerome Vitaline's video for the 3rd time, the cork hadn't only flown off, it had embedded in the wall. We now had motive, means, and leverage, not just data fraud. Stock manipulation that turned everything into a federal buffet, the kind of thing that turns boardrooms into witness lists and PR firms into co-defendants. The second drive had done what the first only implied, connected caloric to criminal intent. According to Vitaline, someone had shorted a lure food stock using insider knowledge of its faulty nutritional Claims they knew the product wouldn't hold up to scrutiny, so they sold high leaked. Just enough suspicion to trigger an investigation and bought back. Though once the damage was done, high-level fraud securities crime, white-collar doom with a side chart. Mustard Wolfe didn't pace, he never paces. But there was a stiffness in his silence that told me his brain was running hot. That video changes the field. I said, no. Wolfe replied, it is the field. I took the cue and got on the phone with Saul Panzer, find out who made trades against Allure stock in the last fiscal quarter. I told him options activity, short sales, foreign shells, everything Indian tied to caloric, especially if the trade volume spikes just before the fair view window got its saw. Said, and if I'd find someone, then you stay in the shadows. We're not springing the trap. Just yet, Wolfe wanted one more piece of the puzzle. Before calling the final meeting, he got it at 3:17 p. And it came in the form of Jerome Vedolini leave unharmed, and standing in our front hallway, I opened the door expecting the usual a messenger. A second-rate threat, maybe a delivery for Fritz. Instead there was Jerome Vedoline's slightly grayer. Then in the photos, eyes a little sharper than expected. Hello, he said calm. As you please, I assume Nero Wolfe is home. He is, I said, and unless this is your twin, you've got some explaining to do. He smiled, stepped inside, and said, on my child. I brought him into the office, where Wolfe stared at him like he was a library overdue by a decade. You, Wolfe said, are supposed to be dead. I know, said Jerome, sitting, but I wasn't in the mood though. Explanation Vetterline's version of events, filled in the last holes 12 weeks earlier. He'd gotten wind that someone inside Allure had panicked, started erasing files, rewriting internalegs, cleaning up a mess. He'd already recorded his video, the thumb drive in the mayonnaise was his fail-safe, the second drive hidden in the mustard washes checkmate. I left both in my kitchen, he said. I wanted someone to find them. If I disappeared, turns out I didn't need to vanish. I just needed them to think. I had you faked it. I asked no. He just stopped answering calls. You were hiding. I was waiting. He'd holed up in a family cabin in the Neo Catskills with no Wi-Fi, no phone, and a single-minded commitment to see which of his former colleagues blinked first. I expected Borden to panic nest to Weepile to spin, but it was H. Effner I really wanted to watch, and did he? Wolfe asked. Ojai said. Jerome, he moved before the rest, quietly tried to find out what I'd left bang, but he couldn't get to the mustardy. Smiled, then turned to Wolfe. I believe you know what to do next. Wolfe nodded. Indeed, by nightfall, we had the missing piece. Saul called back at 6:02 p. Bingo. He said there was a sudden high leverage short against Allure Foods about 2 weeks before the FDA's quiet inquiry into caloric. Anonymous show company came in address, but the registered U.S. point of contact, don't say it, Benton Hafner. I whistled. That'll do it. Wolfe gave me a single nod. Send the invitations, the summoning. We made the calls. Wolfe's tone was characteristic cowardly. Each suspect was summoned to the brownstone Ketu Sharp. The following evening, Cynthia Borden asked what the meeting was about the mayonnaise. Wolfe said, can the lie it tried to tell didn't press pile. Sounded distracted, agreed. Too quickly. Nest was terrified. Stand that he'd be there. Hafner said nothing for 4 long seconds, and then confirmed I had a bad feeling about that. Silence. Wolfe saw it in my face. Mr. Hafner said quietly, understands that this is no longer a game. A final unsettling note at 11:23 p. But Fritz found something in the trash bin in the guest powder room. The false bottom from the mayonnaise J. It had been returned quietly, discreetly, as if to say, let's forget this ever happened. Wolfe examined it under the lamp. No fingerprints, clean. As sin, they've begun to erase their tracks, he said. That is a mistake. Preparation for the endgame. The next day passed like a countdown. Wolfe didn't move from his office. Fritz Dubelch checked every dish for the post-meeting dinner. I went through my notes, me recordings, and my shoes just in case. Someone tried to plant something on the way, and it's 700p. When the chairs were set, Wolfe's desk cleared the jar, placed like a witness in a courtroom. We were ready almost, Archie Wolfe said at 7:45. One last detail, have a second drive with you, but do not show it. Not until I signal. What's the signal? You'll know. I nodded, and then one by one they began to arrive. Cynthia, Pyle, Nest, Hafner. Each took their chair, each exchanged glances, each with a different version of the same fear. Wolfe looked at them and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this evening we will dispense with pretense." He folded his hands. You are here because a condiment lied, but people lied first. There are few things as unnerving as Nero Wolfe. When he decides to play host, he doesn't serve cocktails, he doesn't offer appetizers, he offers only scrutiny, polished, surgical and silent hand. When his guests are suspects, that silence can peel paint off the walls at precisely 8 o'clock p.m. The door to Wolfe's office shut behind the final entrant, Benton Hafner. The room was arranged with Wolfe's usual symmetrical order, to the large desk between him and them, 4 guest chairs facing forward, and me parked just off to the side with a notepad. I didn't intend to write, and Wolfe didn't glance up. He waited until everyone sat their tension, forming a kind of fifth presence in the room. Then here spoke Miss Borden. "Mr. Nest, Mr. Pyle, Hafner, you are here for one reason, a condiment told. A story, and I intend talk. Know which of you wrote the ending." Desmond Pyle shifted in his seat. Nest clutched the arms of his chair. Borden crossed her legs and tilted her chin, as if this were just another high-stakes pitch meeting. Hafner simply looked tired. Wolfe gestured toward the center of his desk, where the jar of Benedict's mayonnaise sat like a relic. "You all know what this is, but not all of you know what it meant." No one spoke. Wolfe didn't mind. He never does. He let silence do the warming up. The jar was found in Jeremy Vitline's refrigerator, but its contents were not mayonnaise. They included a thumb drive hidden under a false bottom, encrypted, yes, but revealing in its structure a folder labeled caloric files concerning internal trials, emails and correspondence suggesting scientific minutiae. Pyle let out a tiny breath. Wolfe didn't look at him. "But you already knew that," he said. "I knew Jerome had concerns." Pyle offered, voice smooth. "I know he was hiding evidence in his condiments." No. Wolfe raised one brow. "Then why were you seen entering Julian Nest's building the night after Natalie Vetterline came to me?" Pyle blinked eye. "I was looking for Julian. I wanted to make sure he wasn't panicking," which he was, Wolfe replied, "because someone told him the past was about to become public, and he assumed it was you." "I never threatened Julian." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "You didn't have to. Your presence was enough." Wolfe turned his gaze on Nest, who looked like he was halfway to molting under pressure. "Ernest, you falsified scientific reports." "I was pressured by whom?" Nest swallowed. "Cynthia." Now Borden's head turned. "That's a lie. You came to my lab." Nest said, voice arising. "You said the calorie variance was unacceptable. You said we needed tostriamline. The data, that's how you put it, because you were using inconsistent baselines." She snapped. Wolfe cut in enough. His voice was quiet, but it stilled the room like a switch had flipped. "This is not a courtroom. I am not a judge. I am not even the police, but I am the last person between you and consequences." Helen back slightly. "I have 2 drives. The first you know of, the second you do not." Now all 4 of them sat up straighter. "The second drive contains a video recording of Vetterline explaining in no uncertain terms that he discovered an internal scheme, one designed not merely to falsify nutritional science, but to enrich a particular party by shorting the company's stock." Wolfe let that sit like a weight dropped on velvet. "No more referees, no more. May he named one of you." All eyes were on him now, except mine. I watched them. Pyle was still almost unnaturally, so Ness looked like a kid at principal's office. Borden blinked once sharp. Deliberative Hafner. Hafner turned just slightly, ever so subtly toward the jar, as if recalibrating a threat. Wolfe noticed Hafner. He said, his voice dropping half a register. So you attempted to retrieve the false bottom from the jar twice. I didn't know what you were. Don't insult me. Wolfe said you returned it through the powder room bin 2 nights ago. You thought I wouldn't notice. Wolfe tapped the jar gently with a fingertip and made a dull sound. The first drive implicated a culture of misrepresentation. The second revealed a personal enrichment scheme, one that required foreknowledge of a regulatory response. And who had that? Access the Director of Regulatory Affairs. I didn't. You did, Wolfe said, cutting through separatist. Are you shorted Allure stock under a shell corporation? The trade was flagged by the SIC weeks ago. They've just now matched it to your name, Saul Panzer. Confirmed the timing. Hafner's silence was the kind that only comes from being caught by a man who never raised his voice. You were never protecting the company. Wolfe said you were protecting your profit. Caloric was a fraud, but fraud alone wasn't enough. You needed it to fail publicly. And on a schedule. Nest was shaking his head, horrified. I didn't know. You never do, Wolfe said, until it's too late. Pyle looked away. His PR instincts had finally shut down. Cynthia, for her part, seemed unreadable. You're sure it was Hafner? She's no, Wolfe said. I am sure he acted, but I do not believe he acted alone. Now she stiffened. He needed 2 things. Wolfe continued. Undeniability. One you provided, the other he manufactured. Born gave a tight laugh. You have no proof. No. Wolfe turned to me. Archie. I reached into my coat and pulled out the second drive, walked it slowly to Wolfe's desk. I didn't plug it in, just placed it in front of her. Mr. Vetteline's own words, Wolfe said, including a specific email forwarded to your personal account, one not listed in the Allure system. He outlined the shorting plan and your agreement. I didn't send it, she said. He must have. It was blind copied from Hafner, Sir. Wolfe said. You didn't need to reply. You needed only to agree. Silence was sufficient. Borden stewed. You can't prove it. On the contrary, Wolfe said. I just did. The collapse. They didn't confess, not out loud, but in the span of 30 seconds. Hafner slumped back in his chair. Pyle buried his face in his hands. Nest looked like he might pass out. And Cynthia, she walked out, just opened the door and walked out. No one stopped her. Wolfe didn't even call out, because he didn't need to. She wasn't fleeing. She was accepting gravity. Later that night, Wolfe sat in his chair while I stood with Jerome Vetteline in the hall. You could go to the feds, I told him, but you could also vanish again. Let the data speak. Jerome gave a tired smile. Maybe this time I'll let it. I saw him out, then came back to Wolfe, who was sipping beer like nothing had happened. All settled? I asked. No, he said, but nearly. And that was as close to victory as Nero Wolfe ever admitted aloud I've seen. Nero Wolfe unravel liars with nothing but syllables and a side glance. I've watched him turn millionaires into beggars, attorneys into schoolboys, and aunts memorably made. A senator apologized for existing, but the performance he gave the night, he gathered Borden, Hafner, Nest, and Pyle into his office to deliver the truth. But that one will haunt the fearsomes for the rest of time. It started with silence, as always. The 4 suspects sat in their chairs, same positions as the night before. Wolfe sat behind his desk, motionless, but composed, with the air of a judge who'd already read the verdict and was now deciding whether to speak or simply nod. Jerome Vetteline wasn't in the room. That was Wolfe's touch. His presence had already served its purpose. A dead man returned only once. After that, he became redundant. I took my position near Feglobe, arms folded, watching as Wolfe leaned forward, and with the gentleness of a man discussing recipes, dismantled their lives. Ms. Borden, he began, you were the cornerstone of caloric. You championed it, sold it, elevated it. You insisted on marketing it as ascientifically vetted regulatory compliant innovation. In truth, it was neither. Borden gave a slight shrug. That's your opinion, no Wolfe said That's-mer. Nest's testimony Nest looked like he wanted to shrink into his collar. She told me to suppress the second trial results. He mumbled more accurately. Wolfe corrected suggested. He streamlined the anomalies, then copied only the first data set to regulatory stuff, a classic misdiction. He turned his head, Mr. Pyle. You too played your role. Media control you, removed traces of academic pushback, paid off bloggers, leaked a debunking gargle about a whistleblower that did not exist. Pyle closed his eyes. It was policy. He said containment anticipate, and preempt. Wolfe snorted. You anticipated too. Well, you wrote fiction before the facts arrived. He turned finally to Hafner, who sat rigid, hands clasped too tightly in his lap. And you, Wolfe, said few words, cool and sharp, were the mechanism. The system trusted you to verify. Instead you made sure the storm came only after you'd set your sails for a moment. No one spoke. You could hear the faint hiss of the radiator for it. Mercifully was keeping dinner warm, but staying out off sight. Then Wolfe did something rare. He stood. Ladies and gentlemen, he said no at full height, filling the office with his presence. You have not merely participated in dire fraud, you engineered one. And then, Mr. H. Hafner, you chose to profit further by betting against your own company. Wolfe reached for a manila envelope and slid it across the desk. I passed it to the suspects inside. He said, you'll find documentation confirming the timeline of the stock shorting, along with the blind copied email to Miss Borden's personal account. The content includes approval of the strategy and a payout schedule. It was forwarded by Mr. Vetteline before he vanished. Cynthia Borden stayed composed barely. I didn't write that. She said there's no proof. I replied silence can be consent. Wolfe said. Legally, perhaps not really. Unequivocally, Hafner glanced toward the door. No one's arresting us, not yet, Wolfe said, but the SEAC has been informed, and unless you all intend to coordinate your defense, which I do not recommend, each of you will be seeking separate counsel. Bimmerding, Pyle exhaled hard. So what is this blackmail? You want money, immunity? What? Wolfe sat. Again, no. I want you to understand the thing you're in. He pointed at the jar. That mayonnaise, that jar? It was never the story. It was the warning. Someone left it behind, not just as a container, but as a metaphor. A lie dressed as food, something meant to nourish, but built to deceive you. Packaged corruption in calories and served it as innovation. He paused, and Mr. Vetteline, imperfect though he is dissident, was one deception too many. There was quiet then. Nesbroke, I'll testify. He said, I can't even done lying. I'll give a statement. Pyle, to his credit, didn't deny it. You didn't need us. He said, you already know everything, not everything. Wolfe said, only anyhow. Cynthia Borden stood. You're smug. I am correct. Wolfe replied, that is the more damning charge. She said nothing else. She left. Hafner followed. Quickly, hadn't looked at either of us. Nest lingered, then turned and walked away with a sort of mournful collapse. Pyle paused at the door. You'll never work with anyone in our industry again. I never did, Wolfe said, and never shall aftermath. The brownstone was silent again. By 9:30, no more suspects. No Morley's. Wolfe sat and took his beer with the deliberation of a man who preferred beverages to people. You know, I said, it's a little eerie how calm you get after dismantling 4 lives. I did not dismantle them. He said they did that themselves. I merely removed the masks. He sipped. Jerome Vetteline did more. Have planned for betrayal without knowing its face. That requires a certain pessimistic brilliance. You think they'll be charged eventually. There are too many threads now. Nest will break entirely, and Pyle will. Bargain. Borden show vanish or reinvent herself. There's always another boardroom. And Hafner. Wolfe looked at the empty jar still on his desk. He will be the first to fall because he touched the pantry. I grinned. That's what gets him dinner that night. Fritz served roasted duck with fennel white asparagus and a Riesling from a cellar. I'm sure his insured more heavily. In my apartment, Wolfe barely spoke. Until dessert lemon tart with candied orange peel. As he lifted his fork, he made his closing statement. Not a joke, not a quip, just Wolfe moral and cutting, as ever they wrapped poison in purpose. It is the most palatable sin. He took a bite. Thank God for Fritz and that Friends is how Mayonnaise told a story. And Wolfe gave it a better ending when Wolfe says, I have no interest in melodrama. He means thickened where people shout and wave pistols, but verbal jewels intricate trapsychological squeeze. Plays that kind of drama he serves with relish, and in this case also with a jar of mayonnaise. The real reveal had already happened in layers. During meetings, subtle tilts and lies that collapsed on themselves. But as Wolfe saw it, there had to be one moment where the architecture of the case stood visible, a single frame where all the elements clicked. That moment came 2 days after the office gathering in the form of a private Territorian visit from Saul Penza and a call to Inspector Kramer. I was at my desk when Wolfe told me to summon Kramer to the brownstone. You're serious, I asked you. Want to invite the NYPD into your sanctum? You sure we're not running a fever? I'm quite serious. Kramer will want attribution. And I wish none, of course. You don't. That would be vulgar. Wolfe simply looked at me. Inspector Kramer arrives. Inspector Kramer of Manhattan Homicide has all the charm of an angry bulldog and the political instincts of a raccoon in a henhouse. But he's sharp. He may resent Wolfe for solving cases from the comfort of a chair while his own men knock on doors and wrestle paperwork, but he listens. He arrived at 6:30 p.m. Hot already in his hand, eyes narrowed. This isn't a murder case, he said as Fritz took his coat. You've got a body I don't know about. Not yet, Wolfe said, but you may wish to prevent one. I offered Kramer a seat. He didn't take it. You forget. 5 minutes, 3 will suffice. Wolfe said, what I give you is not evidence but momentum. You'll find documents linking Benton Hafner to a Cayman cellist. To short Allure food stock, you'll find email correspondence retrievable, if not preserved, between Hafner and Cynthia Borden, outlining timing coordination, and you'll find Desmond Pyle and at least 2 media outlets' covert payrolls. That's not homicide. Kramer said no. Wolfe agreed, but it is securities fraud regulatory conspiracy. And I believe the kindling for violence. Someone will try to silence Asomi. Else you're saying they'll eat their own. I'm saying, Wolfe said, they already have, but the body hasn't turned up yet. Kramer exhaled through his nose. You've got names. I handed over a folder inside. A summary of both thumb drives, Nest's verbal confession, Vetterline's Vide transcript, and Wolfe's annotated timeline. Kramer flipped through it, stopped halfway. Jerome. Vetterline's alive. Yes, he willing to testify. He has not yet said, but he's documented what he needed. Kramer grunted. He looked at Wolfe. Then me, you keep putting me in positions where I owe you no. Wolfe said, I put you in positions where you must choose between action and neglect. Kramer gave him a long stare, then stood fine. But if this gets messy, it already was. Wolfe said, I've merely sorted the pieces that night. Something broke at 11:04 p.m. We got the call Julian Nest had been attacked outside his apartment building. Not robbed, just struck from behind. His briefcase stolen. He suffered a concussion and a fractured wrist. Nothing else was taken, except the briefcase contained copies of the caloric trial data. Nest had apparently told someone, maybe Pyle, maybe Borden, that he was preparing to go public. Wolfe called it the moment he heard Hafner. He said Orsomion acting for him. I nodded. You think Nest will still cooperate? No, Wolfe said. But we no longer require his testimony. The press moves in. Next morning, the Gazette ran an article. Lon Cohen's doing, titled Cracks in Caloric Internal Sources, Alleged Suppressed Data at Allure Foods. It didn't name names, but it didn't have to. By noon, Allure Food stock dropped 14% by 2p. And the company issued a press statement calling the allegations consistent but concerning by 4. Cynthia Borden resigned, and by 6 quotes. Desmond Pyle was unreachable by phone, email, or courier. Final assembly. Wolfe closes the book. Wolfe called me into the office after dinner. He had a thin smile on his face. Not satisfaction, exactly, something more refined, like Aces player who just sacrificed a bishop to corner a king. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, do you see? I see a company unraveling. No, Wolfe said, you see truth reclaiming territory. He reached into his desk and removed the jar, still sealed, no empty inside this jar, lied, he said, but it also warned, like all lies that leave behind a trace of guilt. Jerome's idea, yes, a flourish dramatic. Perhaps beautifective, a lie in plain sight, concealing a deeper one. I nodded. Y'all think they'll all be charged? Borden will attempt immunity. Pyle will vanish. Hafner will face indictment. Nest will recount everything, then seek academic redemption. And Fiedeline. Wolfe glanced toward the window, where the sky had turned fat, deep indigo color. Manhattan gets before it exhales. He will disappear again, this time not out of fear, but to keep what's left of his integrity. The client returns. Natalie Vetterline came by the next day. She was quiet, composed, and grateful, in a way that didn't require fit words. He's safe? Wolfe asked. He is, she said, and leaving for Europe. He says to thank you. Wolfe grunted. He also said, she added, Faith no longer hates Benedict's mayonnaise. Wolfe allowed one eyebrow to twitch. Tenth case was not entirely without value. The case closes by the week's end. Brownstone returned to its natural rhythm. The orchids were fed, the books reshelved, the pantry restored to sacrodaligment. Fritz made Kokova, and Wolfe, of course, resumed his war on physicalment. As for me, I wrote up the case notes, locked the thumb drives in the vault, and made a call to Saul to keep an eye on Pyle. Just in case. One morning, while buttering toast, I asked Wolfe if he thought it would all stick, if the system would do its job. He sipped his coffee. Justice is not always swift, he said, but sometimes it's patient enough. To be precise, he set down his cup, and precision, he added, is the only honesty a liar cannot. Fake life in the brownstone, after a case, always goes back to something deceptively ordinary. The chairs are put back. Just so, the spice rack is returned to its sacred geometry. The guest towels are replaced. The do not disturb hours reinstated. And Fritz resumes muttering to his tarragon like it's been traumatized. This one, though, the case off mayonnaise that lied, left something behind that didn't fit so easily into a drawer. It wasn't just that a tech-savvy whistleblower played peekaboo with federal law using sandwich spreads, or that a company nearly detonated from the inside out, thanks to a handful of lab notes and one very tidy fraud. It wastes that. Wolfe, who detests technology lawsuits and anything that interrupts dinner, chose to get involved. And if there's one thing I've learned over the years of being Wolfe's legs, eyes, ears, and occasional decoy, it's this: when Nero Wolfe chooses to get involved, it's never for reasons he'll admit, at least not right away. The dust was still settling. Pyle hadn't resurfaced. Hafner was being quietly invited to interviews by men who carried laminated badges, and Dead and Smile Nest was reportedly in a rehab clinic recovering from exhaustion, and Cynthia Borden, last we heard, had boarded a flight to Zurich on a non-refundable edict paid for with loyalty points. Wolfe, meanwhile, had resumed his old habits: 2 beer lunches, 4 hours with Theurchids, and for good measure, a moratorium on any mention of mayonnaise. Monday, 11:13 Fritz had just served Wolfe a second helping of brules with morel mushrooms and a sliver of Gruyere, and I was halfway through reorganizer case file drawer when the doorbell rang. Expecting anyone, I asked. Wolfe didn't look up from his eggs. If I were you, would be informed. I opened the door to find a delivery man holding a small rectangular box, no label, no return address. He handed it over with a shrug and walked off before I could ask if he wanted a tip or immunity. I brought it and set it on Wolfe's desk and stood back haggard at the box, as though it might detonate Archie. Yeah, open it. I did. Inside was a single jar, not mayonnaise, not mustard, not even something edible, just a clear glass container filled with small crumpled slips of paper. I unfolded the top one. You can kill a truth, but you can't bury Helly. It floats. GV. Wolfe made a low sound in his throat, something between irritation and amusement. Jerome, he said, theatrical to last. What do we do with it? I asked. Wolfe waved a hand. Burn it. I raised my eyebrows. Burn the whole jar? No, he said. The jar may be useful for stirring dried basil later that day. Lawn. Cohen dropped by, not officially, just a walk. By that happened to include a request for coffee and a full debrief. I can't print half of what you gave Kramer, he said, stirring 2 sugars into a cup. Fritz had reluctantly allowed him to carry past the kitchen, but it's going to move some needles. You didn't hear that from us? I said, of course not. He grinned, but the Vetterline footage, if that ever surfaces, it won't. Wolfe said it has served its purpose. Kramer might disagree. Kramer may do as he pleases. Wolfe replied, but the footage is not evidence. It is pressure. And pressure, as you know, is more effective when applied in private lawn. Tipped his cup. You're getting sentimental in your old age. Wolfe raised one brow. Get out, he said. Evening brownstone dining room dinner that night was cool, rich, and slow-baked, with duck confit and garlic sausage, the kind of dish that takes 12 hours to make and 3 to forget you ever ate it. Fritz brought it out like a procession. Wolfe inhaled the aroma like a priest at the altar. I waited until we were halfway through before asking why this case. Wolfe paused. You mean, why did I accept you? Hate food politics, you loathe corporate intrigue, and if you ever touch a thumb drive, it'll be because one fell into your beer. He sipped his beer, then said, because the lie offended me, that's all. It attempted to hide inside a thing meant to nourish. It weaponized appetite is blasphemy. He took another bite of cassoulet and chewed slowly. I will abide many sins. Archie, but not that one. Tuesday 9:52 Natalie Vetterline sent a letter, not an email, a real one. Heavy stock black ink folded with precision inside was a thank you note and a list of projects her uncle had decided to fund. Small research grants for independent food science programs, whistleblower protection services, and donate particularly ambitious startup building public calorie analysis tools. Attached was a check, no amount written, just Wolfe's name and a line that read, for services rendered and lease unburied. Wolfe didn't deposit it. He had me send it back with a handwritten reply. The truth was payment enough. Wednesday evening, Wolfe was in the plant room. I was reorganizing the liquor shelf, and Fritz was debating whether a mayonnaise counted as cheating. On his Deetwin, the phone rang. It was Kramer. They folded. He said, Hafner's talking. He's naming names. Nest will be cooperating once he's cleared. And Borden's counsel made contact through a third party. You're welcome. I said, you're insufferable. Kramer replied, but yet Hanks. The last note at the very end of the week. Wolfe asked for the mayonnaise jar again. I brought it from the pantry, empty and clean. He placed it on his desk and looked at it. Archie, he said, do you recall what Miss Vetterline said about her uncle's habits? Shurish said he hated Benedict's. Indeed. He paused, so he chose it deliberately. Epic de brand he abhorred. Why? To make it stand out. No, to assure no one would eat it. I blinked, of course. I said he wasn't hiding the data. He was protecting it from accidental discovery. Precisely. Wolfe stared at the jar for another moment, then handed it to him. Throw it away. Even if it could store basil. He gave me a look. I threw it away, pilling. Wolfe ended the case without a grand statement. There was no victory lap, no champagne. He didn't even demand roast squab to commemorate the occasion instead, he went back to his orchids. The world spun on the truth, once more had floated to the top, and the brownstone returned, what it had always been, a fortress. Against chaos, a sanctuary of order, and occasionally, a place where mayonnaise could lie, and still because I closed the last file, clicked my pen and leaned back in my chair. Case closed. I said Fritz called us to dinner. Wolfe didn't answer, but he stood. That for him was a standing ovation, you'd think. After a week of false brands, encrypted condiments, and the slow collapse of an entire corporate food empire, that Wolfe would permit himself something resembling zatishocked. Not a smile, God forbid, but a hint of relish, maybe a double helping of duck. A second beer without prompting instead. He returned to silence, symmetrying the cultivation of orchids with all the flourish of a man who hadn't just pulled a quartet of professional liars through the digestive tract of their own schemes. Me, I did what I always do: followed the notes, burned the breadcrumbs, kept the receipts, and now that the dust had truly settled, I gave in to the unindulgence Wolfe never forbade. I watched, because sometimes the best reveals aren't delivered during the interrogation. Sometimes they happen in the quiet hour, after, when no one's looking, and the mask slips just far enough to catch the man underneath. The real ending came in two parts. The first arrived by mail from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Wolfe didn't open. I'd had me do it. Inside was a single-page letter, thanking him for unofficial illegality, the exposure of certain illegal market actions involving employees of Allure Foods LLC. No names were mentioned, no promises made, but the tone was clear. The government wouldn't press Wolfe for statements or testimony, that Wolfe Sadie's the only thank you worth receiving, one that concludes rather than invite test. Ibe's second part came from Natalie Vedeling. She returned not to gloat orcry or deliver poetic justice, but simply to sit across from Wolfe and say in that calm, cool voice of hers, he never really wanted revenge, just for someone to understand what they did to him. Wolfe nodded once. They do now. She paused and said, do you think it changes anything? Wolfe steepled his fingers and gazed past her. No, but it removes the pretense that nothing needed to changing, that friends is the Wolfe finish. No chase, no cuffs, no last-a-minute confession scrolled in lipstick on a mirror, just consequences calibrated, and clean nest ended up testifying through a letter. Heavily lawyered but clear. HR took a plea deal. Pile stayed gone, and Cynthia Borden, she landed somewhere in Northern Europe, consulting for a nutritional blockchain startup, no doubt under a new name, but probably still allergic to shame. As for Jerome, he disappeared again, this time into something more like peace. He left Adenation under an assumed foundation. Named to Wolfe's Orchid Society, Wolfe never acknowledged tired, but he did spend 3 straight afternoons in the plant room without merging. Once Fritz and I agreed not to mention it. One final moment a week later, I found Wolfe at his desk with a book in one hand and a spoon in the other. Fritz made pudding, he said, not looking up. Let me guess, I said. Chocolate? No. Vanillarial vanilla. He set the spoon down and finally looked at me. There is an integrity to honest food, he said. It does not overpromise. It does not conspire, it simply is. I raised my brow. You think pudding is morally superior to people? No, he said, but it is more consistent. And just like that, silence again. The phone didn't ring. No one knocked, and Wolfe didn't so much as grunt for a full hour outside the city spun, with its usual tempo crooks, crooking suits, posturing lies fermenting inside. The brownstone held. Fritz called dinner. I stood. Wolfe didn't move until the second call. We walked toward the dining room, and just before we left the office, he said, Archie, yeah, if a man hides a truth in mayonnaise, he assumes no one will look. I grinned. But you did. Wolfe simply turned.